Hi guys, it's Leah McDermott. I am the founder of Your Natural Learner and Bridge Academy, and I am so excited for you to watch this video, What's Wrong with School? A little bit of information before you watch. This video was originally filmed as part of a series called Unschooling 101. We've since changed the title of that a little bit, but all of the content is still relevant and informative. In this video, you're going to see lots of information about what is currently happening in our school system, the history and trajectory that got us here around the public school system, and the way that kids learn, how we approach that, how we've standardized it, and what you can do about it. Make sure you stick around to the end so you can find out how to get the rest of the videos in this series, because even though this one is so informative and helpful in and of itself, there's 3 other videos from this series that just give you so much more information and some really good action steps to what you can do with this information. So grab a notebook, something pleasurable to drink, and dive in. Okay, so the first day today is titled, What's Wrong with School? And I do want to start out by addressing maybe why you are here, because I have a feeling that this is going to be shared and resonate with a lot of different people. So you might be here because you've heard of unschooling and you have reservations about the realness of this. So you're here because you want to learn more about what this really is, how this really works. Maybe somebody around you is unschooling, says they're unschooling. Maybe you've seen this online and it's just not connecting yet, but you're curious. And so that's why you're here. Or maybe you've discovered that you are already an accidental unschooler and you just need some validation that this is a real thing, that this is a logical path that you can follow for your children and feel confident that they're getting what they need from you and from this experience. And I think maybe the third category of person is that someone sent this to you to help you learn more about unschooling. Maybe your partner or your co-parent or your daughter-in-law or your neighbor wants to share this with you in a way that they don't feel like they have to defend their choices, or they just don't feel yet like they have the right words. And so they've sent this to you because they want you to hear these things and feel these feelings and understand where they are coming from. And if that is you, I would really like to invite you to take the time to listen in, to learn something, to open your mind a little bit. We're going to be spending time dispelling myths, talking about the school system, being very raw and real. And yeah, we're just going to invite you to tune in and pay attention here. Now, I also want to clarify all of the information that I'm about to share with you today and over the next several days is not something that I have just thrown together. This is not something that I share lightly. This is a compilation of real data in my experiences. I have been in and around the education system in some capacity for more than 20 years now, as an educator, as a student, as a researcher, as an unschooling parent, as a homeschooling mentor, an unschooling mentor, and now as head of school for a homeschooling private school. So this information that I'm about to share with you comes from my personal experiences with my family, my children. I will likely share several anecdotes about my children and my, personal experiences. This comes from my research. I am a researcher at heart. I am daily looking at data and information and cultivating my own research studies as well. I've been doing this for over 20 years. And finally, it comes from the work that I do at Bridge Academy, which is the private school that I founded for homeschoolers and unschoolers around the world, and the thousands of students all over the world that I've worked with directly through this program in every grade level, and what I've learned and experienced through my connections with them, through the communication with their parents. All of this data comes from real children, real experiences. So I just wanted to share that with you. Now, before I get into today's topic, which is what's wrong with school, I need to emphasize this is not an attack on teachers. This is a raw reality of the rapid decline of the public education system as I have witnessed and experienced it in my over 20 years in the field. As the world evolves and the way your children enter into adulthood becomes more and more uncertain, now more than ever with the advancement of AI and the technology that is rapidly taking over the workforce, you're here because you have felt that shift and you see that uncertainty. So everything I'm about to tell you should resonate in some way, because if you're here listening to this, if you're reading this in whatever capacity you are consuming this content, you've felt a reason, a need for something to be different. But before we can imagine a plan for a better path forward, we have to understand what we're moving away from and why. If you're on a road trip and you realize that you've gone the wrong way, you have to stop and take a moment to figure out where you are and where you made that wrong turn before you can get back onto the correct path. And that's essentially what we're doing here, is we're saying something isn't right. This isn't the way I'm supposed to go. This isn't the right destination. I'm not on the right path, but you can't just stay on it and you can't just make a crazy turn. You have to stop and say, okay, I'm not on the right path here. Something isn't correct, but I need to identify what's wrong. Where am I right now? And where did I make a wrong turn? What do I need to change? And until you identify those things, and in this context, that's really what your why is. And I really don't love that phrase, what's your why? It's very like woo woo and like the, cliche start to every online course. And I admittedly have used it in my own courses in the past. It just felt like the right starting point. But as cliche as it is, you do need to identify what point isn't working for you so that you can confidently make a shift. Most of us don't realize how much school affects us or how deeply the roots of that conditioning go. It affects how we think, how we work, how we parent, and how we believe learning happens, and even how we define success. So my goal today, if you don't have it already, is to give you that why. Hopefully, one of the three main areas I've identified as core issues with the public school system will resonate with you. So let's start at the beginning. This is going to be a little bit of a history lesson into the specifically US public school system, but definitely will still resonate outside of the US. Okay, reason number one is the roots of industrialism. Simply put, this system we have today is outdated. While the idea of community learning has been around for as long as there have been humans, the most recent or the current iteration of public school only dates back to around the time of the Industrial Revolution. And the goal at that point was twofold. Number one, that the public schools would provide childcare while the parents were working. And number two, the system would train children to enter that same workforce immediately after school. This was a very clear factory model of learning. And I'm not going to sit here and say it was a bad experiment, because at the time it made sense, right? When the majority of work was factory style, why not train the majority of children to have a baseline level of knowledge where, remember, at the time, school was one of the few places to access that knowledge and already get used to the schedule, the bells, the authority figures, etc. So it made sense at the time to create this factory level of learning. Okay? We're not gonna, I know you'll see a lot of like conspiracy theory ideas and, oh, it was so bad. They were training a nation of workers. All right. Maybe it wasn't evil. All right, parents had to work, so they needed a place to keep their kids. So there we go. We create this free public school system. The kids can be there. And while they're there, we might as well give them a base, a foundation of knowledge, because you could not get this knowledge on your computer. You couldn't ask the robot in your kitchen to tell you what, I don't know. I can't think of something off the top of my head. You couldn't ask the robot to give you a piece of information that you didn't know. You had to go to school to get a lot of that information. So we could create these basic standards, hire teachers, teach the kids so that everybody had kind of that basic foundation, and at the same time, condition them, whether you believe that was a bad thing or not, condition them to fit their lives into that factory model of learning. That way, as soon as they turned 18, as soon as they exited that system, and if you follow that path of population, as this generation of kids is entering the workforce, a generation on the other end is retiring. So we can just push those kids right into that job. They're already used to having an authority figure, waking up early, following the same schedule that their parents are following, because that's when they were at school. They're used to the bells, they're used to the control. Easy peasy. It's a great way to keep the system going. But we're going to fast forward. Do we have a majority of jobs that are factory work anymore? No. Is school the only place to obtain knowledge today? No. So what's left? Childcare. And if you pay close attention, conditioning. The real goal at the advent of the current iteration of public school was not innovation, it was compliance. Times have changed, but the system has not. So speaking of change, that leads me to point number 2, which is the myth of equality. Now, as times have changed, or as times changed, and more of the push was towards college versus factory work that disappeared, big gaps started to be noticed in the system. So as factory work started to disappear over a few generations or a few decades, the need to keep the public school system relevant was still there. And so the idea was, at that point, the shift was, well, we can't promise these kids that they're going to leave high school and walk into factory work. So let's just convince them all to go to college. But what happened here was, if we encouraged everyone to go to college, how could we ensure everyone was actually adequately prepared for it? Because college presented a whole new level of challenges. If you went into a factory job, it didn't really matter what the factory was making. Your work was probably going to be the same. But if you left high school and went to college, it wasn't going to be the same experience. You needed to have some level, first of all, a higher level of foundational knowledge than was required for factory work, but also some specific chosen path. And what we noticed as we made that shift, and when I say we, policymakers, people at the top, people in control, what was noticed as we made this shift towards push everyone to college instead of push everyone to factory work as a way to keep the public school system relevant, we noticed that there were these gaps, that we suddenly couldn't say that every kid was adequately prepared to step into that, because really what was needed to adequately prepare a kid for factory work? Compliance. That's not necessarily true for the college track. So a language of equality was adapted, but the practical application of this has massively failed, because equality became synonymous with standardization. And I recently taught a live class on this, so I'm not going to regurgitate a lot of that information here, but we will link to that video so that you can learn a little bit more about what standardization really means in school. Now, I'm going to be fair here once again and say that more of the fault of this failure falls on government as a whole rather than on the individual school systems. However, if a crack in any system is identified, the effects are felt everywhere. So, yes, all of the impacts of standardization under the guise of equality, and I want to be clear here, equality is not a bad thing, but when your method of applying that equality just looks like standardization, that's not equality. And we're going to talk about that. But all of these ideas and this guidance didn't start at the bottom. They didn't go to teachers and say, what's needed in your classroom? What do your kids need? They started at the top, often with lobbyists and curriculum companies wanting to make a buck on it, standardized test companies. You have no idea how much money in the education system goes to standardized testing companies, especially in the US. So all of these ideas started at the top, and so that's where the blame can be placed. However, it's still part of the system. It controls the system. And so anytime a crack is in a system, the whole system is going to fail. If a town water main fails, it doesn't matter how great the pipes in my house are. I still don't have any water. So if the crack in the system is all the way at the top, of course, the effects of that are going to trickle down to the most vulnerable, which is our children. But there is complacency. While we can place the blame at the top, there is complacency or apathy, whichever word you want to use, in the system at every level. And I have seen this play out at every level. I have seen this at the highest level, at the federal level, Department of Education. I've seen this at an administrator level. I've seen this at a teacher level. I had a meeting last week with an administrator of a school district. It was a very important meeting about a student that had transferred to Bridge Academy and was having issues that needed to be addressed by their previous school. And in this important meeting with the parent on the call, the administrator says to me, "Boy, I'd rather be playing golf today than dealing with this." The apathy was incredible. What a thing to say when a parent is sitting there with a genuine concern. I've seen this at every level. Simply put, you cannot adequately equalize humans. We are all unique learners. We have unique talents, skills, passions. We come from unique situations, families, and backgrounds. In an industrial factory model of learning, success is not measured by how much you grow. It's measured by how much you or how well you conform. Naturally, then, what really happens is a widening of the gaps in equality. When a school can't reach levels of conformity to standardized testing data performances, for example, they lose funding, which causes more gaps. We can, of course, see those gaps in that. Oh, my goodness. Can we mute that person? Thank you. This disproportionately hurts children from low-income areas, children with neurodiversities, and children that are just generally more creative, more kinesthetic in their learning. And I'm sure that there are parents on this call, parents listening to this, reading this, who fit their child in one of those areas, right? The gaps just were too wide for their child to fit into. Specifically, we're seeing this happen with children with neurodiversities in every case. Equality in schools is a myth. Not because it can't be achieved, but because we've focused on all the wrong things. We have not focused on equalizing opportunity. We've focused on equalizing standardization. Not only is that not possible, it's not a positive thing. We shouldn't desire to standardize humans. Replacing factory work, replacing the factory model of education should not have looked like turning children into robots. And that's what standardization is. Standardization means the same, everyone the same. That's not equality, that's standardization. Now, while we're here, one of the main arguments I see against homeschooling is that if a rash of parents pull their kids out of schools, that just further harms the ones that are still in it. And this, I firmly believe, and I might get pushback on this one, but I feel like this is posturing. Number one, your primary obligation as a parent is to your child. And I want that to be very clear. Yes, it is important to have a sense of community, a sense of care for those around you. I absolutely resonate with that. But no matter what work I do, no matter how many hours I sit here and I teach you and I write books and I start schools and I write curriculum and I advocate at every level, even still, my primary role will always be a mother to my children. That will come before all of this. And that should be true for you too. And there's nothing wrong with that. Number two, by making a bold choice, you might inspire others to do the same. You know, a lot of the reason many parents don't take the jump into homeschooling is because they don't know anyone else around them that does it. And they're afraid of doing it alone. They're afraid of not having support. They're afraid of the judgment. And a lot of times, we don't even realize who we're inspiring. Taking one leap, one person saying, I'm going to do this differently, might inspire another person. So don't underestimate how your choices affect others. And number three, one of the biggest issues we have in the public school system right now is overcrowding. There is a consistently growing number of students and an increasingly growing number of teachers leaving the field. I talked about this recently on my Instagram about how I hear daily from teachers who are leaving the system, and that should be a huge red flag. If I went to a doctor's office where suddenly all of the doctors were quitting, the nurses were quitting and leaving, that would be a red flag for me. I don't think I'd want to go to that office anymore, and I'd want to find out why they were leaving. If I found out that all of the teachers are saying this is not it, did you know that one of the largest growing numbers of homeschooling, or the largest groups of new homeschooling parents, are former teachers? That should say so much. Not only are they not contributing to the profession anymore, they're not keeping their own children in the system. And that should say a lot. However, fewer kids in the classroom allows the teachers that are there to give more attention to those who remain. So it is helpful in that regard. The number one, or one of the biggest issues, is overcrowding. One teacher, I've been that teacher. One teacher cannot, no matter how much you care and love each of those children, you cannot give individual attention to 32 kids of any age. You cannot do that. And that's how many kids I had when I was a teacher 15 years ago. So I can only imagine the overcrowding now. So even removing a few of those kids would have helped me have a little bit more attention for those that remained. Okay, moving on. Now, I will be honest as we move into this third point that this one paints a bleak picture, and it might be the one that hurts the most, because so far I've talked about the historical context, the industrial context, the myth of equality, and sort of what's happened there with those, ideals. But this one is the human cost. And if you, like the majority of people, have any sort of educational trauma, or if your children have any sort of educational trauma, this one will likely sting, but it is important to recognize. Do you know what you get when you push multiple generations of children through a standardized system where regurgitation of facts is celebrated over innate curiosity and creativity? You get a society of traumatized individuals who don't ask questions of the system that raised them. So think about that one for a moment. If your parents went through this system and you went through this system and everyone around you went through this system, it doesn't matter if it traumatized everyone, if we're all walking around with this collective trauma, this collective dehumanizing of our souls, it's hard to see that it's a problem. If everyone says, I hate school, I hate my job, I hate waking up early to do this, I hate homework. If everyone feels that way, it becomes very easy to become numb to it. Well, that's just the way it is. Of course you hate school. Of course you hate homework. Of course I hate my job. So of course you hate school. But think about that. Why do we all feel that way? Is that really what life should be? Is that really what being a human should be? Just hating it from age 5? That's it until you retire, until you're 70 years old? You just dread every day? That's trauma. That's collective trauma perpetuated by a system. When you create a very powerful system that has a goal of essentially turning humans into robots, that's what you're going to get. We have a public school system that began with a system of industrialization and has morphed into a more harmful system of standardization. And in a system like this, the human dies. And that's the goal. Now I want to talk about some statistics and data that doesn't feel good to read or hear, but please pay attention. Kids and adults are more anxious and disconnected than they've ever been before. There were some studies done in 2024 by a variety of groups, the American Psychological Association, pediatric associations, psychologists, sociologists, education researchers, all came together to do a study about anxiety and emotions, specifically in high schoolers and in college students. 60% of high school students say they feel stressed about school every single day. Every single day. High school students today report higher stress level rates than adults. Now, I want you to think about the last time you went to a doctor and they asked you if you were stressed or you had some kind of symptom and they told you it was stress related. If stress is a health factor for adults, imagine the damage that level or higher level of stress is doing to a still growing and developing body and brain. 60% of high school students say they feel stressed about school every single day. 75% of high schoolers and 50% of middle schoolers in the US specifically say they feel near constant stress about school, homework, academics. So 60% feel it every single day is what they reported. 75% feel it near constantly. Now, this doesn't stop in high school. 44% of college students have exhibited symptoms of anxiety and depression. More than 50% of college students in the US last year admitted to having suicidal thoughts. 50%. So think about that. 50% of middle schoolers, and this study did not look at elementary students. 50% of middle schoolers said they feel near constant levels of academic stress. When they get to high school, 75% of them feel near constant stress, 60% saying they feel it every single day. Once they get to college, 50% have had suicidal thoughts. Look at that trajectory. It's not getting better. The more pressure placed on a human, the worse the reportings of anxiety and stress, and even to the point of suicidal ideation. It grows. 50% of college students and high schoolers are worried about their future, about their job prospects, about their finances. They see the writing on the wall. Our kids are not blind. They are not stupid. They are not naive. They see through all of this. They're not wearing rose-colored glasses like their parents might be. They see because they have access to information. They see the world. They don't just see their school building anymore. Times have changed. Okay, we have a window on a little box in our pocket to the whole world. They know that what they're doing every day, what they're being told to do, the performance that they are supposed to show and go through, they know that it's useless to them. They see that. And yet we just keep pushing them through it legally. And it's not creating healthy, happy humans at all. And they know that the jobs aren't there. 50% of high schoolers and college students are worried about what they're going to do after this facade of school is over. Because we're still promising them empty things. And quite possibly the worst statistic here that I'm going to end on. Out of those 50% of college students that have felt suicidal thoughts, only 7% of them have sought out help with these feelings. And I'm going to add a very scary statistic here. 7% of those who have felt suicidal thoughts in a college have sought help for that from mental health professionals, peers, adults. However, more than 70% of US teens have used ChatGPT for advice or support on mental health. Now, that's not what this content is about, but it is very important for you as a parent to hear. I saw a video this week on Instagram of, unfortunately, an influencer in the alternative education market praising this statistic, thinking it's great and encouraging children to use AI to talk to about their problems. And I couldn't have been more disgusted if I tried. Because not only is that discounting the connection that we should be encouraging parents to make with their kids, but it also is encouraging a very dangerous path of using artificial intelligence to help with mental health, real mental health issues. There's a lot of factors here, but I think that that is something that every parent in today's world, especially parents of teens, should be aware of, because the statistics are it doesn't matter, even homeschoolers, we should all be very aware of this. More than 70% of US teens have used ChatGPT to help with mental health. Check in on your kids. Okay, how does this happen? How does the humanness get taken away? Well, we take away their curiosity. School immediately becomes a place to stop asking questions and start generating the right answer. All right, you take a 5-year-old, you put them in a kindergarten classroom, and immediately that part of them starts to disappear. Their curiosity is taken away at a very young age. Have you ever hung out with a 4-year-old? Do you know how many questions they ask in a day? I've done this research before, and I should have written it down, but it was like over 300 questions a day on average that a 4-year-old asks. And once they start school, it's not about asking questions anymore. It's about generating the right answers. And something that has always made me sick to my stomach is seeing school activities where the answer or the prompt is that they have to write a question and they can get that wrong. Like that you can ask the wrong question. We take away their curiosity. We take away their creativity. Our very human expression, our very unique humanness can't fit into a system where every project and activity has to be standardized. And I will never forget the first time my oldest stepped foot into a school. He has always been homeschooled, unschooled. But when he was about 7 years old, our neighbor who went to our local public school, they had an event at her school. It was like a track event, like a fundraising thing where for every lap around the track they walked or ran, they earned, pledge dollars for a charity. And they were allowed to invite family, friends, people to come observe, walk with them or join them in this after school event. So she invited my son. They were best friends. And so we had to walk through the school to get to the track at the back of the property. And I remember him walking through and just kind of looking at the walls, at the art and projects that were hanging in the hallway. And he pulled me aside and he whispered and he said, "Mom, why does all of this art look exactly the same?" He couldn't comprehend that every child was creating exactly the same thing. Because in our home, art was what you made that day. No two pieces of art ever looked the same. He and his brother and friends were making different things all day long. And his brain couldn't comprehend, why are there 30 pieces of art that look exactly the same? I'll never forget that. We take away their creativity. We destroy intrinsic motivation by replacing it with external validation in the form of grades, gold stars, behavior charts. I believe I talked about this too recently in a YouTube video, so we can throw that link for you as well. We're born with intrinsic motivation. We are born with curiosity and creativity and the desire to learn things, to figure things out. And the school system, through this method of control, has gaslit us as a species to believe, to not trust that intrinsic motivation anymore. Everything is extrinsic. And then we're told to believe that that's what we should seek, that it should be an internal motivator to seek external validation. We should want to get gold stars. You should want for yourself to get a good grade given to you by this other human. You should want internally to get green lights on your behavior chart. We completely destroy the idea of intrinsic motivation. And then we have children, teenagers, adults who don't have intrinsic motivation. They need the external validation because we've trained it out of them. We broke them. I see this every day, every day. Don't get me started on the behavior charts either. If I do turn this into a book, there will be a whole chapter on behavior charts. I will say this as a caveat. If your child is in a program and your school, your child's school or daycare uses a behavior management app of any kind, I highly encourage you to request that your child's name be removed from that, because that display of external that external display of behaviors is so dangerous to a child. It's so traumatizing. And you have the right to request that. Even if you're not homeschooling, even if that's not an option right now, please do that. Okay, we take away their curiosity, we take away their creativity, we destroy their intrinsic motivation. I'm not done. We measure worth by productivity and performance, rewarding burnout and compliance over trusting in ourselves and listening to our own bodies and our intuition. That constant need to be doing something, to be productive, to be pushing ourselves towards burnout, rewarding hustle is very dangerous. It creates a dangerous culture of a lack of humanness. We don't rest. We don't reward rest. We don't reward joy. We don't reward passion, art for the sake of it. We just reward hustle, grind, productivity, competition. And all those things are natural human anyway. We have natural competition. But when we replace all of that intrinsic desire to compete, when no longer we're only competing with ourselves, but we feel this just like constant pressure to perform and to compete with those around us, it's very unhealthy and it messes with our ideas of success. We'll talk about that more another day. And finally, we promote disconnection. We're going to talk about this one in the future as well. We promote disconnection by micromanaging socialization and creating false environments that don't allow our children to engage with a true representation of the world. Later in this series, we're going to dispel myths about unschooling, and one of the biggest ones, no surprise, is going to be the myth of socialization. The way that public schools teach, quote unquote, teach socialization actually promotes disconnection. It promotes isolation. It promotes bullying because it's not representative of the real world. I don't spend all of my life only working with and conferring with people my own age in my own geographical 4-mile radius with some overseer controlling it at all times. That's not real life. So our children are not getting practice. If school was doing a good job of socializing kids, we wouldn't have millennials that won't answer the door or the phone. Okay? We'll talk about that one another day. So now I want you to put all this together. I want you to imagine taking a curious, creative, joyful 5-year-old. I have one of those right now, actually. My older two are teens and preteens, but I have a 5-year-old at home, and he is curious and imaginative and creative and asks a million questions a day. Imagine taking that child and stripping away all of the things that make them uniquely human over the course of 12 to 13 years, slowly stripping that all away. And then at the end of it all, not even providing what was promised to them. And no wonder we have such a broken, sad, conditioned society. All in all, these are the lessons we get in school. Compliance over creativity, competition over community, and perfection over process. We walk away with a fear of failure, an inability to rest, and a very unhealthy addiction to validation. Naturally, this damage to our humanness runs far deeper than academics. It impacts our very humanity as a whole, both on an individualistic and societal level. We don't trust ourselves. We don't trust our intuition. And that is a pretty great way to control a population. And that's the most conspiratorial I'm going to get. Now, I want to pivot before I end for today because I don't want you to leave just feeling like I stabbed you in the gut emotionally. And if you have a 5-year-old at home as well, I'm sorry for the emotions that I may have just caused. My goal here is not to blow up the school system. It's to wake you up from the illusion that public school is the only or the best path to learning. Once you see what's broken here, you can't unsee it. And when you see that something is broken, you have to decide what you're going to do about it. You cannot pretend that you don't see the check engine light on your car. You can ignore it, but you're asking for trouble. So now it's time we start asking ourselves, what's possible instead? We need to acknowledge that this system is a failed or outdated experiment. We can learn from it, as we have with all past methods of learning, and we can create something better. I'm not saying that the best method is to just revert back to what existed before the public school system, because that wasn't fair or equal either. Yes, in past centuries, in past, eras of humanity, we have had systems of, forms of community learning. We've had one-room schoolhouses. We've had, villages that took over teaching kids. We've had mentorships and internships. There's always been a way that we've taught our children. And this public system as it exists right now is just another iteration of that. It was just an experiment. And maybe for a while it was the best method. But we have to look objectively and say, is it still? Is what we've turned this into still truly the best that it can be for our kids? Collectively, I think we would all say no. So what are we going to do about it? And we have to ask those questions at an individual level and at a societal level. And not all of us are going to be the people that make changes at the societal level, and that's okay. I'm one of those people that is making those changes as I see them for the collective. We can't all do that, but you can make choices at your individual level. No matter what, to progress forward, we have to put the human back at the center. And while I see and I believe there are a lot of wonderful alternative options that are arising now, and I've created one at Bridge Academy, parents are in the current position of figuring out something that works in the interim. We don't have enough alternative systems right now. So a lot of parents just have to decide, am I going to keep my kid in this system that I know is broken? And if you listened to this, if you watched this, if you read this, you can't say you're blind to it now. So you have to decide, is this a system I'm going to keep my child in, or am I going to do something bold? Am I going to do something better, different? Am I going to make that change for my child? Most importantly, more than anything, we need to return autonomy and humanity to our children. And currently, the best possible way to do that is through unschooling. Now, don't panic, don't freak out. We have many other days to get into this. Today was about pulling off the rose-colored glasses. That's what today's content was. Tomorrow and in the next several days, I'm going to talk about the nitty-gritty around it. What does that actually look like? What are the myths? What do I do now? How does learning really happen? We're going to keep teaching. We're going to keep learning together. But today, more than anything, I wanted to give you a solid understanding of the historical context of why the public school system is where it is right now, and also an understanding of what happens to the human psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and academically and physically when we put them into these systems of standardization and tell them that it's equality and we tell them that it's for their future, for their own good, when that's a lie. That's gaslighting at its highest level. So I'd love to hear from you. How did that feel to hear? Was that something new for you? Did you learn something new? Did you feel something new? I'd love to hear your moments if you're already homeschooling or unschooling, or if you found a good alternative. We would love to hear that as well. Tomorrow we're going to talk about how do we learn. So it's going to be more science, more data, more research for you. Looking at, okay, today we broke down kind of what happens in a systemic, standardized system of learning. Tomorrow we're going to talk about what really happens in our brain. How do we really learn? So that should be pretty interesting for anybody that's in a parent or an educator. Nothing new, just validating my why. Yes, good. All right, I have a few minutes. This was a perfectly timed 12 pages. Now I know 12 pages keeps me right at that hour mark. Thank you guys for letting me experiment with this. It felt good to be able to just read what I wrote and put it out there. So thank you for letting me do that in an experimental way. All right, you've made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that that was really informative for you. And more than anything, I hope it really validated a lot of thoughts or feelings or emotions you're probably already having about the current education system and how your child fits into it or doesn't. Now, there are 3 more videos, like I mentioned, in this series, and we want to make sure that you can get those, but not just that you can get them, that you actually can use them and pay attention to them. In our own experience and research and consistent with lots of studies, what we've found is that when people invest something tangible, they're way more likely to pay attention and consume the content. So what we've done with these other 3 videos is very simple. We've added a pay what you want option so that you can unlock the rest of the videos in this series. This isn't about making a bunch of money or profit. All of the money that you spend here goes right back into the work that I'm doing at Bridge Academy and to help further the message of supporting families in alternative education choices and in making every education better for every child. So click down below. You can go right to the link, pay whatever you want for these videos, and we will immediately email you a password and a link to access the other 3 videos in this series. In those videos, I'll cover how do we learn, which is the scientific information about how learning happens in our brain and what motivation is and what are the different levels and types of learning. In the 3rd video, you're going to see, we're going to learn about educational trauma, what is deschooling, how do you help make that transition from a very schooled mindset into one that is embracing your unique child, self-directed learning, and starting to understand that process. And then in the final video, you're going to get lots of action steps. It's basically, okay, I'm going to homeschool or unschool, and now what do I do? And in that, we talk about the transition period. We talk about, routines, how to set this up in your home to make it make sense for you and your child, and how to get there in the least stressful way for everyone. So click down below if you want to get those other videos, and we can't wait to share more with you.